Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Dissecting Diddy, our weekly podcast wrap of the Sean Diddy Combs racketeering conspiracy and sex trafficking trial. We are in the home stretch. Closing statements are in the can, and we've got the judge charging the jury, deliberations expected to begin imminently. And we could have a verdict by next week, sometime before the 4th of July. I'm joined by our esteemed legal analyst, Camille Russel, Esquire, and my legendary co-host, Nicole Johnson.
Legendary. Thank you.
To all of us for trying to get this thing in the can one more time, because there's a lot that happened this week. And this was a pivotal week for both the prosecution and the defense, with closing statements to kind of weave together both of their narratives to try to drive it home for the jury. So, Camille, let me start with you. How effective do you think the prosecution was in its closing statements? And the same question for the defense.
Well, I believe the prosecution was quite effective. They outlined everything, laid it out for the jury, and they presented everything, pretty much giving them all the tools necessary to decide one way or the other, right? So I think that they were pretty effective. I think what didn't work for them was that they had to dismiss some of the charges, and so that must be in the background of the juror's mind, thinking, well, didn't you know this before? Didn't you assess your case before you presented it? You must have known that you didn't have whatever evidence you needed before starting this whole thing, right? So if I was a juror, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, well, you said you had it in the beginning when you presented your opening statement, but now you have to backtrack and backpedal, and now you don't have it. And so that's not a good look for them. So that may hurt them quite a bit when it comes to
these jurors. They're not attorneys, right? So it could be very possible for them to see the prosecution dropping charges at the end of the trial, and the message being sent to a juror potentially that, well, wait a minute, is your case not as strong as you think it was, to your point? And, you just wonder what goes through the mind of a juror when they're thinking about what decision they're going to make. They're not legal experts making all of these decisions on the law. They're learning on the fly from the instructions that they're getting from the judge. And you, I'm sure, have seen this many a time. Something that seems logical legally doesn't really translate to a jury.
Right. So one thing I've learned over the decades of doing this is never guess what the jurors are thinking, because they are, a juror could be thinking from a number of things ranging on the spectrum. And so a lot of times, especially for a trial of this length, I think it's day 30 or 31.
7 weeks.
Yes. So I think they're not really too much into the law, but just using their common sense. And that's what us as attorneys actually ask them to do. So if you ask them to use your common sense, the common sensical approach is, why are you at this point dropping charges, right? And then I just think that has to be on what the jurors are thinking at this point. Why are you dropping charges? It's not as strong as you claimed it was in the beginning. And so that's got to be hurting them.
It's really about the perception now of the jury. They took in all of this information. Like you said, Camille, charges were dropped. They're going to say, what happened? Didn't you know before? And it's a big assumption to think that they're going to understand, how to take it in. It's all about perception. So there was a point in their closing statements where the prosecution went back to reiterate the sex workers, show the pictures of the sex workers. They went back, played audio of Sean Combs telling Jane Doe, hey, get on your job. I'm on my job. Don't play games. And I guess all of that would speak to this criminal enterprise, if you will. But again, it is a big task for the jury to process it and to come back on a decision in as far as the RICO charge.
Nick, that's a great point. What you said, recalling what, Combs said to various people, get on your job. And we've been saying from the very beginning that this case is going to be about who can successfully characterize the same set of events to the jury. And so, when, the prosecution is arguing that that is a literal interpretation, right?
Right.
Get on your job.
Mhm.
And they're trying to tell the jury that translates into Combs using his business as a criminal enterprise. But conversely, you hear get on your job, and that could be taken as a colloquial kind of, like just, why don't you just do what you're supposed to be doing? It doesn't necessarily have to mean this business is being used as a criminal enterprise. Combs could arguably be just saying, do what you're supposed to be doing. And so at the end of the day, who can successfully win over the jury with their characterization of the same set of events is, all of these instructions that Combs was handing out. Is it just, a boss who's talking to his longtime employees who's super busy and just saying, I need you to do this for me? Or is it, I'm a criminal boss and you are being coerced into doing these things against your will? And it's a toss-up at this point as to, which interpretation is going to win the day. And Camille, to your point, you can never guess what's going on in the minds of that jury. And this is the super interesting part of every single trial.
Yes, indeed it is. And I don't know how much the defense has harped on this, but with respect to the charges that they had to drop in the end, right? They got an advantage, really, because what they were able to do is, meaning the prosecution, they were able to present conduct and acts of Mr. Combs, yet now he's not even charged with those things, right? And so,
Oh yeah, they withdrew, I think, the attempted arson,
right,
and the attempted kidnapping,
right? And
but they kept the actual kidnapping and the actual arson charge, if I understand it correctly.
Okay. So to the extent that they're dropping charges, or any attempts, anything that supports those offenses should not even been presented to the jurors. So they to me, they got an advantage that they perhaps shouldn't have gotten. To your point, Jay, when you say things like "get on your job," right? You could use that a number of ways. And like you said, is he just throwing it out there? And how often does he say it? And did you, in your, is there business records that says this is in fact your job? No. So, I mean, I think I think a reasonable interpretation of somebody saying, hey, get on your job, it is not the literal meaning of it. And I'm sure the defense argued it in that manner.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to Dissecting Diddy. We are talking about the end of this trial. We are on the cusp of jury deliberations, and we wanted to do some mini reflections here because this has been a really big, complicated trial with a lot of witnesses. I believe 34 witnesses. The defense did not put up any of those witnesses. They did their job, in their opinion, by effectively cross-examining all of those witnesses. And Nicole, I mean, this has been a trial of the decade for sure. What are your reflections on what we've seen over the last almost 2 months?
Well, I want to question, did it really live up to expectation? Because when we went into it, we expected to see celebrities come through there.
We did have Kanye.
Well, yeah, for like a millisecond. And what was Kanye doing there? He went and then left?
Support.
Oh, okay, to show support. But I was expecting to see celebrities get called as witnesses. I wanted to see, we saw and heard some salacious testimony. We saw evidence. There was sex tapes, if you will, freak off tapes, if you will. We didn't get to see them, but those tapes were played for the jury. We heard from Cassie Ventura. We saw clips of the video in the hotel. So there was a lot. But did it really live up to what we thought?
Well, I think that there was the TMZ expectation. Let me not just say TMZ. There was the tabloid kind of ish expectation of what this trial was going to be,
Yeah.
and then there is the legal reality of what
Yes.
the trial was. And so we had two big name people in the courtroom. One on the stand would be Kid Cudi,
Yes.
and then we had Ye,
They just
visit
popped up to
for a
show
hot
support.
popped into court to show his support. But yeah, to your point, I mean, at the beginning of this trial, there was speculation about, tapes that were going to come out and celebrities that were going to be exposed and celebrities that were going to be called to the witness stand. And at the end of the day, like so many trials, this was a trial about raw testimony and raw data evidence and mounds and mounds of text message transcripts and those videos which were played for the jury but not for the gallery and not for the overflow rooms. So we didn't even hear the audio. The jurors were wearing the headphones. They were able to look at the monitor right in their screen. So yeah, I mean, in some respect, this was if you are a fan of the tabloids or and that's the track that you wanted to follow, then there's some disappointment there. I think it'll be interesting to hear if we ever do from the U.S. Attorney's Office, what their game plan was and how effective they thought their strategy was at the end of the day.
Yeah, and Camille, let me bring you in here. They promised a lot because we had an indictment, a superseding indictment. I think 3 of those. They promised a lot. Do you believe they delivered?
I don't think they delivered what the public was expecting. So initially, when this case first surfaced, there was a lot of chatter about minors being involved. I know that people were speculating that there were going to be some type of trafficking of children of some sort. That never materialized, and that's never been actually an allegation that actually was brought to any courtroom. Then you heard there were superseding indictments, and there was, we're going to be superseding, and there's even at the late hour, right, when the trial was just about to begin. And so there was always an anticipation that there was something more. And that was just, there was nothing there, nothing major that ever materialized from that. I think essentially what we saw here is a swinger's lifestyle with drugs and sex and rock and roll, but here rap, right? And so I think that's all really, and if you took a vote, and this is what I think it all comes down to. If you took a vote before this went to trial and said, in essence, this is what we're going to show you. Sean Combs having sex with multiple people or watching multiple people have sex. And there's some drugs involved, but for the most part, everybody are willing participants who are adults. Would you convict him of that, of a crime of that? And I think resoundingly would be a no. I think it would be a no. If you put the cost into it, taxpayers' dollars, the time, the resources, I would say that the public would vote to not go in that direction and bring this prosecution.
That's a very interesting point. Let's take a quick break and come right back.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to Dissecting Diddy, our weekly Diddy podcast. The jury is about to start deliberating, being charged by the judge, closing statements in the books. And we want to talk about these predicate acts, these predicate crimes, the supporting crimes that are the building blocks for potential conviction on the RICO, which is obviously the most serious charge that Combs faces. It carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. The jury getting an explanation from the prosecution during its closing statements that they only needed to believe that 2 of the predicate crimes were committed. And there does not have to be a unanimous consensus on which 2 predicate crimes. Juror 1 could believe that predicate crimes A and B were committed. Another juror could believe it was E and F. So Camille, legally, am I right in saying that that kind of lowers the legal threshold to open the door for RICO for the jury?
Yes, but I think um, with all that they present to the jurors, whether in their summation, and then they were very effective. I think there is going to be some degree of jury nullification here, and that's the process where the jury pretty much rejects the law and the evidence that they've been presented with. I
Have you
really
seen
think
that
that
in your experience?
yes. Oh
Wow.
yes. Oh yes. And so I think because they were promised so much and the delivery was not all that it was, they didn't receive everything that they were promised, and just because I feel that they didn't meet fully their burden of proving everything beyond a reasonable doubt. I think there is going to be some degree of jury nullification, even if everything, even if all the ingredients are there for the jurors to get to that guilty verdict. I don't think they get there.
So that's a flagrant disregard for the law and just
And the
making your
evidence
decision based on what?
on are we going to criminalize these sexual acts,
Hmm.
right? And I think that is the bigger question, right? You have consenting adults, you have them having sex in whichever way they decide that they want to have it. It happens, yes, across state lines, but the question is, as a juror, do you think that should be illegal?
Is the transportation for the intent of prostitution the safety net charge?
Really
Meaning,
having
is it the
really
one
having
Because I think
most
that's
easily
been
convictional?
proven. Because all
having
you need is that you cross state lines.
right.
Um,
And so there are a lot of people who have bachelor parties and go to Vegas, right? And when they get there, they have sex with uh different people, and they're paid. And so I think that the jurors are going to be looking at that undercurrent. That's really what might trigger some jury nullification here.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Nick, final
Yeah.
thoughts.
What about the defense not calling a single witness at all?
I think they were
Was
sending a
that
message.
posturing to say, "Hey, we don't have anything to say here"? What are your thoughts, Camille? I know it's common where the defense can say, "All right, we're good here. We have nothing to present." But was that a little posturing on their part?
Well, they might not believe that the prosecution met their burden, and so if they don't think that they have met that burden, they really don't have anything else to do. And they might be, because they're right in the thick of it, right? They're doing the they're watching these jurors, and
Burden
they're
of proof resting with the prosecution.
Yes.
right, and they're making the decision, um, minute by minute, and deciding, do we need to even say anything here? And they made that call, and I think it may have been the right call.
Hmm.
It may have been the right call because, again, you have consenting adults, whether it was Cassie and whoever the witnesses are. When they testified, from my understanding is they're consenting adults, and they had sex or they engaged in these sexual activities, and they received the benefit from it. And so I think the
Well,
jurors,
what you are articulating is the defense argument.
well, I don't know if that's
That's
so
what
much
we're
of an
hearing right
argument.
now.
I think they acknowledge that they did receive a benefit. I think Jane receives a benefit of having her rent paid and whatever other benefits that she testified about. And so did Cassie. And so I don't think that's a fact really in dispute that they received the benefit.
Really
Now,
going to come down to how the jury interprets.
Yes, that interpretation is
that
very
is correct.
important.
That is
So let's
correct.
wrap up a little bit because we're going to be pressed for time in a second. We heard prosecution, closing statements, defense now, closing statements, but the prosecution does have an opportunity to rebuttal that. They will have the final say, and then the jury will be charged with the case. Do you believe next week, Jay, Camille, do you believe it can get
Yeah.
wrapped up by next week?
Oh, yes. I think a verdict is going to be quick.
I don't believe this jury wants to be spending their 4th of July holiday weekend deliberating.
Correct.
I think you're going to see a verdict sometime between now and next Thursday at 5 p.m.
What
That
do
is
you
correct.
think? Guilty, not guilty, split?
I don't know. As many trials as I've covered, I've learned never to try to roll the dice and predict what the jury is going to do.
Same.
I mean, they get behind that closed door and you don't know what they could be talking about.
Right.
We have no idea how they've interpreted all of this evidence. This is not a case with DNA evidence where it's like, look, there's DNA. Even those cases can be, spent a lot of time in the gray area. But this was all witness testimony and interpretation of text messages. And so, witness credibility is a huge factor, and who can spin it their way, whether it's the defense or the prosecution. So I guess I don't know. What about you, Camille?
If I had to call it one way or the other, I would call for a not guilty verdict here.
On all counts?
On all counts across the board.
Wow.
Yes.
Nick?
I would think split, mistrial.
Oh, really?
Because I don't think they can all agree. I don't think this jury that we're dealing with here, I'm just not sure, to understand the law, their perception. Was the case proven? There's a lot of questions here. So I don't think we'll have a unanimous decision. I think they'll be split.
That is also, I would also say it's either that mistrial or a not guilty.
All right, well, let's leave it there. Let's put a pin in it and see if we can circle back next week for a final wrap, a final episode of Dissecting Diddy, when we hope to have a verdict to talk about.
Okay.
So that's going to do it. Yeah, that's going to do it for this episode. My co-host, Nicole Johnson, our esteemed legal analyst, Camille Russel, Esquire. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, guys.
All right. Thank you.
We'll see you next week.